In this video, I'm going to walk you through setting up Python as well as VS Code on a Windows machine. So the first thing that we're going to do is within your web browser, just search for Python, and then we're going to select the first result. So this is going to take us to the main Python page, and we want to go to the download section. And so here, Python, the website's going to offer you up whatever the latest version of Python is. In this case, it happens to be 3.9.6. Keep in mind, if you're watching this video in the future, it's going to show some other version, and that's okay. Go ahead and just download the latest version. As long as it's later than 3.7, you should be okay. So I'm going to just hit download Python 3.9.6. I'm going to download that. Once it's finished downloading, I'm going to select that, and it's going to open up the installer. Now, with this installer open, it's very important that you select Add Python 3.9 to path. Do not forget to do this, or then you're going to run into some issues. So make sure that's selected, and then hit Install Now. If you go through the installation process and you realize you forgot to do this, technically there's a way to fix it afterwards, but instead of me explaining to do that, the best thing to do is just uninstall Python and reinstall it. So we'll hit Install Now. You'll get a pop-up. Just go ahead and hit Yes. All right, and once you see this message where it says setup was successful, that means Python was installed. And the next thing that we want to do is just quickly verify that Python's up and running and working. So what we're going to do is we're just going to search for CMD. So that's going to open up our command prompt or our terminal. And then in here, just type in Python-3 -- version. Sorry, we should actually type in Python py-3 -- version. All right, and so when you type this command in, it's going to tell us the specific version that we installed. So we can see that I was successfully installed Python 3.9.6. If you get any kind of error or any message saying that this command is not available, that means that Python wasn't installed successfully. So just go ahead and redo that process just in case. Now, the next thing that we want to do is install VS Code. So let's open up a new tab. Just search for VS Code. And then we'll select this. It's going to take us to this page. And you'll see that VS Code will automatically detect what version you're running. So you can just select Download for Windows. And then once it's finished in downloading, go ahead and open it up. Hit the Accept Agreement. Hit Next, Next, Next. And then you can leave everything as default. And then go ahead and run install. All right, and then go ahead and finish. It's going to automatically open up VS Code. Now, there's a couple of things I want to do. So VS Code at its core is just a basic text editor. However, we can install extensions that give it extra functionality, extra features that'll make it operate a little bit more like a full-blown IDE. So go ahead and select this icon right here. This is for extensions. And then what we want to do is we want to search for Python. And we usually just want to select the first one. It'll have a star, and it's going to be the one made by Microsoft. You'll see that there's other ones made by other users, but we want the main Microsoft one. Hit install. And so this extension is going to give us IntelliSense, linting, debugging, and a few other features that are going to make it a little bit easier to start working with Python within VS Code. All right. And so now that it's done installing, we can just close this, and then select this one to get back to your main file browser. And right now we haven't opened up any folder. So what we want to do is we want to create a folder to store all of our application code. So select Open Folder, and then figure out where you want to store your application code. So I'm just going to store this in my documents. You can store this wherever you want. I'm going to create a new file or a new folder. I'm just going to call it Fast API, but you can name your project whatever you want. So just select Folder. And so that's going to not only create the folder, but it's going to open it up within VS Code. If you get this error, just select Trust the Author and just select Yes. And then we can close out this welcome menu. And so now what we have is we've opened up VS Code, and within VS Code, we've opened up our project code. So right now there's no code that's to be expected. But what I want to do is I want to create a new file real quick, just for testing purposes. So I'm just going to right click, hit new file, and I'm going to name it main.py. And so we want to name it .py because this is going to be a Python file. And before I hit enter, I want you to focus your eyes right down here, and you'll notice something happens down there. So when I hit enter, you'll see activating extension. So it's activating the Python extension. And what the Python extension is going to do is it's automatically going to select the correct Python interpreter, or it may not be corrected depending on what happens on your machine. For me, it automatically detected Python 3.9.6 was installed on this machine, so it selected that one for me. Keep in mind, if you have multiple versions of Python installed, it may select the wrong interpreter. So what you can do is if you ever want to change the interpreter or specify a specific interpreter, go to View, Command Palette, and what I want you to do is search for Python interpreter. and then look for Python select interpreter. So right now, it's going to highlight where the current Python interpreter is, which one's selected, and what's the executable for it. But if you want to change that, you can select enter interpreter path and then provide the path to the specific version that you want. So you can obviously change it, but usually it's able to detect the latest version, so you should be good to go. And so that's all I wanted to do from a setup perspective. There's one more thing that we'll cover later, but we'll get to that in the next section. But right now we've got Python installed and we've got VS Code set up and we've got our project directory set up, so we should be good to go. So now that we have Python and VS Code set up, the next thing that we have to do is set up our virtual environment. Before we do that, we have to actually talk about what are virtual environments and what problem do they try to address. So let me give you a little bit of an example scenario of the issue that we can run into when working with specific packages within Python on your local machine. So let's say that we created a project and this project is called Project 1. And what we need to do is we need to install FastAPI version 1.2.1. So what do? We install version 1.2.1 on our machine so that we can actually use that version. Now let's say later down the road, we start a new project called Project 2. And let's say this version requires us to run FastAPI version 2.4.3 because we want to try out some of the newer features. Well, at this point, if we need to try out a newer version, we have to upgrade FastAPI to version 2.4.3 on our local machine. And this may or may not be a problem. It really just depends on if version 2.4.3 is backwards compatible with version 1.2.1. Because if version 2.4.3 has breaking changes, then ultimately that's going to create issues with our project 1 because that project expects us to run version 1.2.1. And so if we can't upgrade, well, we're in a little bit of a pickle because one project needs one version, the other project needs another version. We can't have two different versions installed on our machine. So what exactly do we do? Well, this is where virtual environments come into play. So with virtual environments, let's say we want to create a project. So we create project 1, and what we do is we create a virtual environment, call it whatever you want. And so this is a isolated environment that will not affect any other environments. And within this environment, we can install any Python packages running whatever version we want, and it's completely isolated to this project. And so when we create a second project, what we can do is we can create its very own virtual environment as well. We'll call it virtual environment 2. And within this virtual environment, we can install any version of any package that we want. So then we can install version 2.4.3. And so both of these virtual environments are completely separated, completely isolated with one another. And so we can essentially install multiple different versions of a single package for each of our projects. And that way our projects don't end up stepping on the toes of other projects. And so now that we have a basic understanding of virtual environments, let's go ahead and figure out how we can actually create our first virtual environment and use it within our project. In this video, I'm going to walk you through setting up a virtual environment on a Windows machine. Now, if you already closed out your VS Code window, go ahead and open up a new one and make sure you open up the specific directory we created a couple lessons ago. Now, what we want to do is we want to select terminal and we want to select new terminal. And this is an awesome feature with VS Code. It allows us to have an integrated terminal within our VS Code window. And this terminal is fundamentally no different than a regular terminal within Windows. It's just built into VS Code so that we don't have to keep flipping between different windows. And if you actually take a look at this right column, we can have multiple terminals open and we can even use different terminals. So the default one on this machine happens to be PowerShell, but you can also use command prompt if that's what you prefer. So if you select command prompt, it's going to create a new terminal. And you can see that this is a traditional command prompt. So I'm going to use this one because that's the one I normally use. However, if you're more comfortable with PowerShell, feel free to use that. Now, the command to actually create a virtual environment within Windows is py-3-m VNV, so that stands for virtual environment. And then you want to give it a name. So give whatever name you want for your virtual environment. You could name it after your project name, or you could just do what I do, which is just call it VNV. And what I like to do is for all of my projects, I give it the same exact name. And that's perfectly okay because this virtual environment is going to be isolated to this project directory. And so even though this project has a virtual environment named VNV, I can create another virtual environment in any other project with the same exact name. And they're all going to be isolated to that specific project folder. So go ahead and hit enter. And take a look over here. You'll see that a folder was created called virtual environment or VENV. And that's going to be, the name of this folder is always going to refer to whatever name you gave it. So if I named this cookies, this would open up a new folder called cookies. And if you want, you can take a look at what's in here. And if you go under script specifically, you'll notice that we've got our Python executable. So this is going to act as our new interpreter. And so what we want to do is right now we are using our global interpreter and we want to change that. We don't want to use the global one. We want to use the specific one in our virtual environment. And that way we can install packages that are exclusive to just this specific virtual environment. And so to do that, go ahead and select View once again. And we want to go to Command Palette and then search for Python Select Interpreter as usual. And then you'll see the one we're currently using, but we want to pass in our newest one. So select Enter Interpreter Path, and then we want to give it the path to our interpreter, which is the path from the root of our project directory to this python.exe file. So we're going to say dot, which is our current folder. So this is going to be the fast API folder. And then within here, we want to go into scripts. And then within scripts, we want to go into the virtual env folder, then scripts, and then python.exe. Go ahead and hit enter. And then if you look down here, you'll see that this gets updated. So now we're still using 3.9.6, but we're using our virtual environment. And so that's all we need to do. And it should remember this every time we open up our project. However, double check every time you open up just to make sure you're using that. If it's for some reason moved back to the default one, just do the same process. Now, the second thing that we need to do is we need to make sure our terminal is also using the virtual environment. And so what we want to do that is just type in the path to this specific activate.bat file. So this is going to activate that virtual environment within our command line as well. So I'm going to say virtual env, and then we want to pass in our scripts folder, and then activate.bat. Hit enter, and then notice what's changed, right? So when you're using a virtual environment, right, you're going to see the name of the virtual environment to the side of it. So always double check whenever you start up VS Code and you start up your project that this is enabled. If you don't see this, then just run the same exact command, and that's going to reactivate the virtual environment. And so at this point, we are good to go with our virtual environment, and we can start coding out our project. In this video, I'm going to walk you through setting up a virtual environment on a Mac.